My name is Gavin Raykemper.
I'm George Bohennick.
And we're going to talk today about Web AppBuilder for ArcGIS, advanced development tools and techniques. I mentioned this earlier, but the URL for this talk, including all of our code and the links, is right there, esriurl.com/wabtools2018, and we'll have that at the end as well. Oh, and there's our contact info if you want to tweet at us and tell us how awesome this talk is. Just kidding. So during this talk, we're in professional services. We do a lot of Web AppBuilder development for a lot of different customers. And during this talk, we're going to hopefully share some of the more advanced workflows that we've developed over the past few years. If you've been doing web development in Web AppBuilder for a while, we're hoping to make your life easier as a developer. And even if you're new to Web AppBuilder, hopefully these tools and techniques, you'll be able to grab something, a couple morsels of usefulness from here. So some of these workflows that we're going to go through together today are, one is treating Web AppBuilder more as a library than kind of an app. The next, what we're going to go through is using Web AppBuilder Yeoman generator to quickly and easily generate widgets. And then George will talk about getting better performance by building your apps and some best practices for working with teams. And then at the end, we'll hopefully have a bit of time for questions. So Web AppBuilder, just as a quick intro, gives your users a WYSIWYG interface to build apps around their maps, adding out-of-the-box or custom widgets and themes. Web AppBuilder has a variety of themes built in, and they're all built to be responsive. The generated apps can be easily tested within the builder or on their own. So we found that there's a lot of interest, especially over the past few years in Web AppBuilder, particularly because it allows users to create apps quickly and easily. Plus it has ways to create widgets and themes for your users when you want to just add a little bit of functionality that is not provided in the out-of-the-box widgets. We can do that as developers, so that makes Web AppBuilder a great tool. But we still find users who are using Web AppBuilder when they probably should be using a custom web application using the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. Web AppBuilder is great for a lot of situations, like if you're building a multi-purpose app, or if you want to create a bunch of similar apps, each with the same data but different sets of widgets. And some of those widgets can even be some of your custom widgets that we build. Those are great. But for other situations, like if you have a very specific or a custom or a complex application, it's sometimes better to create a custom application using the JavaScript API. So we just wanted to note that. But the good thing is that all the skills that you have learned with the JavaScript API transfer over to building custom Web AppBuilder widgets and themes and vice versa. So today we're going to talk about a couple tools for development and some best practices. The first tool we'll talk about is the Web AppBuilder Yeoman generator. But before we get into that, you may be asking, why do I even need tools to develop? To get to that we need to talk a little bit about Web AppBuilder in general. So the GUI WYSIWYG is quite powerful, allowing non-developers to build apps. But it comes at a cost because it adds complexity to the system. As always, what's easy for configurators, it makes it harder for us as developers. So you have all these extra tasks you have to do when creating a custom widget or a theme. So for example, you have to conform to the strict widget file structure, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and you have to make sure copies of your widget are in both the stem app and the app folders if you're testing a real app, for example. And generators can help us automate all this extra work for us. They scaffold out boiler code automatically, and they install and configure tools like Grunt to automatically do these tasks for us, which is particularly helpful for opinionated frameworks. Because the more opinionated framework, the more value you can get out of a generator. A great way to think about Web AppBuilder as a developer is as an opinionated framework that sits on top of the ArcGIS JavaScript API. And by that I mean there's a heavy use of convention. You have a widget folder that always has a manifest.json file. it has a settings folder, etc. The convention pattern is super beneficial because you don't have to do a lot of work configuring. The app kind of assumes where to look for files and functions. And so we want to use the same automated tasks for most projects, and we have a lot of boilerplate code and files that we need to get created during development. Well, that's the perfect situation for a generator, which is why Tom Wason created this as a tool a few years ago, and lots of people found it useful, and it's still thriving as an open source project today, getting plenty of enhancements from you guys, the user community. So if you've never used the generator before, its main two purposes are to install tools to transpile and copy your source code into the Web AppBuilder folder, and it has a sub-generator to scaffold out widget files to save you time. The project has been around for about 4 years now, and each year we in the open source community have added more features to the generator to make your life easier as a developer. This year, one of the bigger features that we're excited about is adding TypeScript. You can now generate widgets that have TypeScript, that are using TypeScript, and it builds in the TypeScript transpiler into the grunt file that it generates. Another big feature that there is better integration with app builds, and George will talk about these build features after me. And we've also added live reload and a few smaller improvements and fixes. So instead of just talking about it, let's get into a demo of the Yeoman generator. So the first thing to do before developing is to have a demo app that you're going to use. So I already went to developers.arcgis.com. I downloaded Web AppBuilder Developer Edition, and I started it up. So let's go ahead and create a new app. I'm going to go ahead and create a 3D app. I'll just call it test app. And when I click OK, Web AppBuilder is actually taking the files and creating an app on my local machine in Developer Edition. For those of you who've used Web AppBuilder before, this interface is probably looking pretty familiar. This is the builder interface on the left-hand side and the preview of what your app's going to look like on the right-hand side. We can choose a theme. We can choose kind of a web scene in this case, and we can maybe add some widgets. So we want to actually create our own custom widget. So let's jump over to the command line to use the Yeoman generator. So I've got my command line pulled up, and I'm currently in an empty directory, so we can see here. And the first thing I have to do are two steps, and these are kind of one-time steps. The first one is to install Yeoman. And to do that, you just do npm install -g because it's going to be global yo. And what that is going to do is install Yeoman, but Yeoman actually doesn't come with any recipes or any generators itself. So that's just putting down kind of the infrastructure so we can use this. I'm not going to run it now because I've already got it installed. So next, I'm going to put in place the files for our generator. So that's going to be npm install -g generator Esri AppBuilder.js. It's a little bit a lot to type. And these instructions are all out on the documentation pages. But this is going to actually install the actual generator itself. And so now, those are kind of the one-time steps. So now I can actually get my project started. So I'm just going to type in yo in this empty directory. This might, for example, be your Git directory where your kind of project is going to live and where you're going to check in your code. When I run yo, it's going to show me all the available generators. And I've got Esri AppBuilder.js right there. So I'll click enter. And so now the Yeoman's going to ask me a few questions about what type of project I want to set up. This is only step 1 out of 2 steps. It's just putting down the infrastructure. So I choose if I want to create 2D or 3D based widgets. In this case, I'm going to do 3D since I just created a 3D app. It asks me where my Web AppBuilder install route is, and that's over here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in. It automatically reads from the Web AppBuilder install route what apps I have set up. So you can see that that test app that I just created is listed there. If you had more, they would be listed, or you can even choose none. I'm going to choose that app that I just created. It's going to ask, do you want to use SASS for CSS pre-processing? I think that's probably pretty good, so I'm going to choose yes. And then here's an exciting question, the new feature. In the past, we could choose basic ES5 style JavaScript, or we could choose the future version ES 2015 plus style JavaScript that will be compiled through Babel. But now we can also choose TypeScript, which will be compiled through the TypeScript transpiler. So I'll go ahead and do that. And now this is kind of a new feature this year as well. Since I don't have a package.json already set in my directory, it's going to ask me the automatic NPM questions to create that package.json. So I'll just click through these. You could put in your metadata information. So now it's going to lay down that package.json and also some basic configuration files and run an npm install. If I switch over to my text editor, let's look at some of those files that it's created. Because I chose TypeScript, it set up a tsconfig for me. That's going to be all of the settings that I need to transpile my code from TypeScript back into JavaScript that Web AppBuilder can use. Like I said, it created that package.json based on the answers to my questions. And then it's actually created a grunt file. So the project that we created will create this grunt file for you. And you can see that there's two locations here. This is kind of a key setting that based on the Web AppBuilder route that I put in, these are the two locations that the grunt file is automatically going to copy my files out to when it detects changes, out to both the app folder that I chose and to the client folder. So now let's switch back here. So that's all set up and ready to go for us. So now that's all the infrastructure. So now I would create a widget, right? So to do that, you do yo, and then you actually have to use the project name Esri AppBuilder JS, and then you could do :widget because we're running the widget subgenerator. Now this is going to ask me questions specifically about the custom widget that I want to build. So maybe you put a name, my widget, you can put in a description, the base class, and then it's going to ask me a bunch of questions about what Web AppBuilder features I want to enable. So run inside a panel, do you want to translations, do you want to do a style, all those types of things. You can turn these on or off. I'll just leave those all on for right now. Would you like a settings page? You don't necessarily need one of those with your widget, so you could say yes or no there. And then within that settings page, if you choose that, it asks, do you want to translate your settings page? Do you want a template file for your settings page, etc. So after I click enter, you'll see the magic just happened in less than a second. It created all those files for me, all things that traditionally you might have had to do manually yourself. So let's jump over into those files. That automatically got created in the widgets folder, and because I named it my widget, that's the folder name here. And we can look at the widget.ts file because it's using TypeScript. And it's just basically stubbed out a basic widget for me. So when I run grunt over here, it's going to automatically watch those files, and when it sees any changes, it's going to run the TypeScript compilation and copy those files out to all locations that it needs to be in. So because it just did that copy when I initially ran it, I can already go over here, into my Web AppBuilder, and I can see my widget with the little Yeoman icon there is all set and ready to go. So if I add that, it even comes with the basic settings page because I chose that. I'll click OK and add that to my app. So let me launch this and show a couple of the new features that we've added to the widgets that are generated from the Yeoman generator this year. One of them, well, like I already said, is TypeScript, and I'll talk about that in a second. Another exciting one that I'm excited about is live reload. So if you enable the live reload Chrome plugin, like I have here, I just turned that on. The grunt file is actually pushing updates to the live reload port. So if I go back here and I make a change, maybe I want to change my widget.html, I'll put maybe some exclamation points in the actual template, save it out. We can see in the background the grunt file automatically detected that change And then over here, I didn't have to press refresh. It automatically refreshed for me. I can just open that widget and I see those changes. So that's just going to save you tons of time right there with the live reload, right? Pretty awesome. Okay, I got a few nods. I'm excited about it. So jumping into the last thing that I wanted to show was more specifics about TypeScript. So how many of you are all using TypeScript already? Okay, maybe a quarter of us, or a little bit less. I'm also new to TypeScript. I haven't been on a huge project that's using TypeScript, but I'm really seeing the benefits of it. So just kind of going through some of the basic benefits. If you're in a text editor that supports TypeScript, it has really smart Intellisense. So if I'm here, I'm in VS Code in this case, I'm going to go this.scene view, and if I click dot, you can see all of the properties and functions off of that object that I have, including the proper Intellisense, right, where it explains every single option there. In addition, with a read more link, right? So this is huge. People, developers, if you're familiar with C# or whatever, you might be used to this, but JavaScript developers like me, we've had autocomplete that didn't work really great for a long time. So this is really an enjoyable feature. And I can just, click center, and maybe I want to kind of console.log that out. And then we're all good to go. The other feature that I like is the type safety. Obviously, TypeScript it's right in the name there. So let's say you want to add a configuration property, or maybe one of your colleagues did, and maybe they called that is active. And you would expect that to be a Boolean, but maybe because they're a junior developer, maybe they made that a string, right? That wouldn't make any sense, but maybe they did that. And when they made that change, they also went into the TypeScript interface for the config up here, and they said is active is a string. But they made that change over the weekend or something, and you didn't notice it. You came back the next day, and you're going to use that config file, so that new config property. So you say if this.config.is active equals true, then do something, right? And in the past, JavaScript developers know that that might have worked, that might not have worked, it might have caused a bug in your code, but because we're in the TypeScript world, you can see that red squiggly line there, right? And it's telling me immediately, okay, you cannot compare a Boolean and a string, so go and fix this, right? And so because of this, I don't have to save it, compile my code, switch to the browser, see that it's broken. TypeScript is already saving me time right here. So that's just the kind of the tip of the iceberg on TypeScript. There's a lot more stuff you can do. Thanks to David Wilton, who's really helped us with this feature over the past year. And you can flag him down if you have more questions about TypeScript. But yeah, we're super excited about it, and we hope that you guys are too, and might use this feature to try out TypeScript. And now I think George is going to talk about testing.
Building. But yeah, I'll talk about testing in a minute. But so once you use these tools, you scaffold everything out, you've done your development, that's all on the front end of your development time, right? You want to get it out to users, and you want to do it quickly. We all like to have our application being used, but there's one more step that you can take to make your application more performant, and that's running a Dojo build on the Web AppBuilder application. If you were at this talk last year, I went over a GitHub project that allowed you to build that out from the command line and run it. This year we took it a step forward, and it's now actually built into the generator. So this is still only with 2D applications. We haven't built it out for 3D. If anybody's enterprising enough, it is all open source, and I will happily review your pull requests. So if we go in now and run the build, we can see a performance increase by 50%. It's massive. If you have users that are frustrated, maybe they're just checking out your app. If you have an app in the public space, this can be especially useful, right? That Web AppBuilder starts loading. It can take a long time. It loads, hundreds of network requests, and that little loading bar stays there a while. But let's check this out. All right, cool. So here I have a file system that was built out by the generator. It has a simple widget in it, and it's run through. I've done all my coding. I verified that it works, and I've run serve while I was developing it. So everything is copied into my my Web App Builder for Developers edition. In order to build this for production, all you have to do now is type npm run build. And it'll go through, it'll copy all of the code that's not in your current widget, in your current directory, from the Web App Builder for Developers edition into a dist file in your directory, build it all, package it into a zip, and make it ready to ship to production. I'm not going to run it now. It's very resource intensive. So it does drain your CPU. It does make it hard to do other things in the background. Don't run this tool on a production web server. But definitely run it because it's huge. Let's see. What this does. So here we have a simple, well, not that simple, it's actually kind of complicated looking. But if you guys seen the dashboard theme in Web App Builder, it's pretty cool. I have a bunch of gauges here, some data on the screen on a map. And if I refresh it, we can see how long it takes to load. So let me pull up my developer tools, open a network, and I'm gonna just stick on JavaScript so we're not looking at a lot of map calls and we're not looking at images loading. And let's see what this does. See right away, it starts loading everything. It's taking a while. Every single JavaScript API file is being loaded. We're already at about 200 requests, no, 300 now. It's taking close to 17 seconds so far. Let's see, it's loaded. There's still some things missing, but it happened and it took a while. Let's pull that up in the other app. This one's an app that I've run the build on already. We can see if I load it right away, it comes up. You'll start to see one of the things here is things load more concurrently too. There's less one thing loaded than another thing loaded because we're doing, a lot of the JavaScript files are combined. So if we look at the network activity on this, we can see right away, even after that initial talk, before when I said we were almost at 200, we're still at a lot. We're at 31 JavaScript files, 32, 33. So you can see it's a lot less. The app's fully loaded. We've had 34 JavaScript files. It's a big improvement. This only goes up the more complex your widgets get. So if you have a ton of widgets in your application, you're using layer list, you have draw tools, you have editing tools, you have an attribute table, all those things bring in new classes. And the bigger your application is, the more savings you're going to get out of this. Definitely use it. So now that we've covered some of the tooling, I'm going to talk about how you can improve yourself, not just the tooling, how you can really improve your development habits to move away from hacking things together and really come up with structured workflows to create high quality widgets. Source control, this is a big one. If any of you here aren't using source control, definitely start using it. Git is generally the go-to these days. You can use GitHub for free if it's an open source project. You can use Git for free on your servers. Basically what it's doing is it's helping you manage your code, it's letting you watch changes, and it's letting you collaborate with the people you work with more easily. No one's going to overwrite your files. You can see everyone's changes, and if two people are working on a file at the same time, you can then merge those changes together easily. Only save your code. Don't save the entire Web App Builder into Git. We see that time and time again. It makes it really hard to follow your changes. It makes upgrade paths more complicated. people that are performing upgrades, someone might upgrade the web app builder, you might not realize it, and you don't update your widget, and then they go to deploy it, they're missing widgets from their config. It can become a hassle. So just only save your code. Finally, test your code. Write unit tests. Unit tests can be tricky to get into, especially when you're using something like the Web App Builder. Web App Builder has a lot of dependencies. There are a lot of things that go into it that make initializing that test workflow a little complicated, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. Write your tests before you write your features. So this is a design tool. We write code that's hard to test. It doesn't have to be that way. If you write your test first, you can write your code to fit your test instead of having to jam your test into fitting your code. Estimate your test out as part of your design process, not as a task you have to do after the fact. If you're planning to write your test after you write your widget, you're not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I mean, my code works, I just want to give it to the client. So if you do it as part of your design process, not only does it help you actually commit to making the test, but it helps you write cleaner code. It helps you think about your requirements before you actually start jamming away on the keyboard. Start small. Just write a couple tests to begin with. Try it out. Don't commit to rewriting your whole code base with a bunch of tests. And again, only test your code. So similar to what we have in Git, we don't want to test the JavaScript API. We don't want to test the Web App Builder. We don't want to load any packages from the Web App Builder, not even base widget. One particularly powerful way to do that is to wrap your widgets. And what I mean by wrapping your widgets is not to write a Web App Builder widget. Write a JavaScript API widget, and then use the Web App Builder base widget to wrap that around it. That gets you a lot of things. It makes your widget more portable. Your organization might not use Web App Builder forever. You might have use cases that don't want to use Web App Builder. Someone might want to port it to mobile more easily. Someone might want to put it in another custom application. If you've written a vanilla JavaScript widget, you can move that over to anything you want, any framework, any product. It helps you write better tests. Your code's separated from the Web App Builder, and you're not testing their code. It helps you write easier tests because you don't have to actually load anything. And it gives you more sanity because you're not constantly checking back and forth. You can even test it in a standalone app without having to load the entire Web App Builder every time. So a lot of times, that can be hard to grasp, like how exactly to do this. I put out a project on GitHub that can show you how. So we'll go over that. And this has it has both unit tests in it as well as the wrapping framework. So it's kind of a overarching, these are some really good practices towards setting up a Web App Builder application. Let me show the app first in action. So I have this really simple app right here. It's a it's a 3D Web App Builder application. I have one custom widget that I developed. You see here, when I click on the picture of Jack, it opens up my widget. Let's go to Dev Summit, and there's a button. When I hit go, it takes me to Palm Springs. So pretty straightforward. I know the applications you guys are writing in production are going to be more complicated than this, but it's just an example to go off of. These concepts can then be expanded upon as you grow your application. So let's look at how I went and designed this. You can see this was built out using the Yeoman generator. I have that standard implementation. I go into the widget, and you can see here I have another folder in my widget with the same name. It doesn't have to be the same name, it's just the convention I end up going with. The actual JavaScript is pretty empty. I'm using the ES 2015 syntax here. That's why I have the imports instead of a require, if some of you aren't used to that. But if I go down here, this is really the only code in my widget. is creating another widget that was built with the JavaScript API. We'll see that again in the template here. All it is a container for another widget. So then I still have access to all those powerful events and communication functions in here, because I can go here and I can add something like onOpen. If I want to do an onOpen function, I could say this.mainWidget.onOpen and just pass those through. So let's look at the actual widget now. If we go in here, we can see we have a very simple widget that all it does is navigate to Dev Summit. It calls scene view to go to Palm Springs. And that's it. For testing this widget, I have a very similar, very simple test, and I don't have to call in anything from the Web App Builder. I go to spec. Let's take a look at our test here. I'm faking out the scene view so that I don't have to test the JavaScript API at all. So what I've done here is I've made an empty object that has a single goto function. Doesn't do anything. It's just there so that I can call that in my function without actually running any JavaScript API code. It's the JavaScript API's job to test their code, not ours. So here I have my test. I say it navigates to Dev Summit. I'm using a testing framework to create what's called a spy around that scene view. And that just allows me to tell if it's been called easily. I call my function, and I say I expect goto to be called from the scene viewer. I expect the arguments of that function to be what I've already defined as Palm Springs. Now what I've done here is I've created a test now that tests to see if I zoom to a particular location without having to worry about looking at the scene and making sure it's at the correct location. It's especially important when you have these kind of UI heavy tasks that the JavaScript API is doing, where it's animation and you would have to wait for deferreds before the map state settled. It might be tricky to find out. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to test it. If this test is passing like it is right now and the map state still isn't correct, it's going to be a bug with the JavaScript API and not with my code. And there's a much better way to deal with that than to go in and try to fix it myself. Let me get my slides in order here. All right. So that's kind of the basics of what we went through. There's some other talks that are coming up here today and tomorrow that might be of interest to you guys, especially in this talk. One of them is later tonight, right before the party. Randy Jones and I are going to be presenting on building for production and JavaScript applications for the enterprise. And in that talk, we're going to be running through a sample of using these tools with a continuous integration service to take a Web App Builder widget that we've developed along with Web App Builder configuration and push that all the way from development to production. There's also the road ahead web development section, and that's going to be talking about everything that's coming up in the future from Esri with web development. So the JavaScript API, Web App Builder. This is also one of the few talks that will not be available on YouTube. The talk we're giving right now will be, but any of the ones with the road ahead in the name aren't going to be available. So definitely check them out. Some resources that we talked about in here. We have the widget generator, and that's obviously what this whole talk is built around. It's very powerful. It helps you write really strong quality widgets. The build tool itself. So I showed the build tool working from the generator and how it's manufactured in the generator. You can run it on its own as part of a separate build file, as part of a continuous integration file. It also exists as an NPM module, so you can pull it into other scripts and use it that way. There's a lot of great widgets available. The community around Web App Builder has expanded tremendously. You guys are great. I always go out to the community. I'll look at GeoNet. I'll try to find new widgets to use in my own code and to use with my clients. It's really great. We've had a lot of help in addition to that in building out these resources like the Yeoman generator and the build tool. So I'm just really happy that you guys have gone on board and helped us out with that. The unit testing examples up on there. Again, if you're having some trouble on how to get started, you kind of just want an example to go by after you've gotten your scaffolding all set up. That's a good place to check it out. The README on there also has some more of this information about wrapping your widgets, about unit testing, things like that. And then we have the standard documentation, download, and support. Even with TypeScript, I always have documentation open in one monitor. Bookmark these, have them at the ready for when you're developing. Some of that stuff isn't completely clear what it's doing, and this can really help you out, especially a lot of, if you're using any utility functions that come with the Web App Builder, it's a good chance to use it. All right, so we're running at the end of our talk now. Does anybody have any questions? Yep.
Could you suggest how to approach this if you have a pretty fleshed out existing application in terms of the Yeoman generator and build?
Sure. So the question is how to integrate some of these tools if you already have a strong application. You're not necessarily using the generator as a startup. And it's similar. So what you're going to want to do, I think, is use the generator to scaffold out maybe an empty application or something. And then you can take that grunt file and the package.json that is created by it, and you can start integrating it into your code. Are you using source control currently? Okay, great. Does that help?
Yes.
Cool.
Yep.
The code you had up before where you're wrapping the widgets, so we were doing that, and I just noticed you have that inside post create. We have ours inside startup. Is there a reason for post create?
No, I mean, so you just need to look at the workflow and where you want to call your constructor. So if you have different things that have to happen at different parts of the life cycle, you can always just put a separate widget in your JavaScript there.
There are some times that we actually edit Web AppBuilder's init.js or flag or some portal.js file where we actually pass the code through so we don't have to sign it again, or we do some weird things. That's the requirement. And what happens when we change the wording is we have to find those changes and keep doing this. And we have many other changes as well, small changes. What do you guys
So the question was, what's the recommended workflow around editing some of the core Web App Builder files like init.js and env.js and portal utils, right? There isn't really a recommended workflow around that. We would advise against it. I know sometimes you might find yourself in a situation where you feel like you have to. A lot of abstraction can go a long way. So try to build it into something else if you can. If you can't, and you really feel like you have to do something like that, again, I'm not advocating for this at all, but store those files separately in GitHub, right? Make sure you can see the changes that are happening to them. And what I would do is I would commit the stock file first and then commit your changes so that you can easily see the difference of before and after.
Yeah, at least then you have a tracking. And you could even build that into, maybe you have continuous integration or something. Maybe you have like something like Jenkins building out to your dev server. You could have that process kind of built into your process. Maybe one last question here, if anybody has one.
Yes.
Yep.
TypeScript is available for both 2D and 3D applications. It's the build tool is the only thing that's not available for 3D.
Great.
Anything else?
We'll be around for questions afterwards. Thanks, everybody.